So here is what you get in your wrap wallet kit. There's two pieces of leather. This is for the ID pocket and for the slide pocket, and this is the other rest of it. And you'll get 6 pieces of thread. I only have 4 here because, well, I don't plan on screwing up, but I figure some of you might make a little mistake, and having 2 more pieces of thread will be useful. You also get 2 needles. Just so you know where all this is coming from, the thread is imported from France. It's the best linen thread I could find. These needles come from England. The leather is coming from Montgomery, New York, then going to Mountain View, California, where it's laser cut, and then going to wherever you are. So let's get started. Alright. First step, and this is trickier than it'll look, is threading the needle and the thread. So I cut the thread at an angle to help it get into these needles, but sometimes it can be a bit of a tight fit, and this is because the needle has to be small enough to easily go through the leather. So I'm having a bit of difficulty right now. Let's try the other end. Alright, finally through. So we need to put the needles on both ends. When I do this, I will pull back on the thread like that to hold it at an angle. That'll keep the thread in the needle better. The problem is if the needle pulls off of the thread, or the thread pulls out of the needle, you'll have to thread it again, which is a bit of a pain. But as I said, necessary to get the right results with the wallet. So this one will be hopefully easier to get through this time. Alright, so that's got the needle on both ends of the thread, like that. Alright, now what we need to do is fold our leather up so you can cut it. So what I'm doing is aligning this last hole here on the leather with this hole there, and you can look through it at a light to make sure that it's all lined up. And then I give it a little crease on the end right here. You want to make sure this is lined up correctly, or else it'll be creased in the wrong place, and that'll make it harder to sew. So now I line up this other side, and I'm doing a crease here. Okay. So now we're going to face it like this with the matte part towards you, the suede side towards you, and you're going to fold this over, and this is how your wallet's going to look, right? Just like you've seen in the pictures. So the first thing I'm going to do is take one of my needles and put it through this first hole here. Right, and what that's going to do is give me these parts lined up, this side and this side. See how there's 2 layers of leather that it's through. Now I can identify this last hole on the end here, and the needle is going to go through that hole like that. Right? And what that's going to do is now line all 3 of these pieces up correctly. And you want to kind of pull this tab in here out so that it's even with the rest of the edge, because having this edge even is what's gonna make the wallet look nice. And the more careful you can be while sewing a wrap wallet, the better the product is going to be. And when we have these professionally sewn, they're all going to look very good. It's up to you to determine what your standard of quality is. I'm pretty OCD, which is why my wallets always turn out pretty good. Alright, so first we're going to pull this needle all the way through. Alright, that's our first thread. Now I line up the needles, and I'm going to pull the thread so it's even on both sides, right? So we have 2 even lengths of thread. And you don't want to pull too hard on the needles because, again, you can pull the needle right off the thread, and that's a pain. These are all little things that I've learned while doing this. So I hold this back piece of thread with my index finger so it can't move, because right now there's not enough friction in the leather to hold it. And then we're going to always start on the front of the wallet here, the part that's going to face you, and take this needle and go through the hole just adjacent to the other one, right? And that's going to go through to the other side fairly easily. You don't need to force it. If you are forcing it, you're probably not lined up and you might pierce the leather, so just be careful about that. Okay, so when you look on the other side, make sure it's also on the second hole over there, or else you might be threading from one hole to the wrong hole on the other side. So the better you are when you start this, the easier the rest of it will be. And so I pull that through and tighten it on this side. And over here, this is going to be one of the parts that's going to be a little tricky and also important for the quality of the wallet. We want to always have this back string coming down, and we want to have the thread that's going back the other direction above there. So I pull down here, and I hold this and thread the needle in over top of that thread right there. Right? And you're doing this because when you look at it at the end, you want all of these threads to be, they're going to all be going down at a slight diagonal, like this, but you want them all to be going the same direction. If you don't do that, some will be up high, some will be down low, some will be crossing the other direction. This will make it all look consistent and make it look neat, as you can see in this sewing example right here. See how they're all going at a slight angle? As long as they're all going at the same slight angle, it's going to look good. If they do different things, it'll start looking funny. I think I might have an example of this in one of these wallets. So here you can see what happens if you let it get a little astray. It doesn't look bad because the laser cut holes are still all perfect, but you can see if you look really closely that some of these pieces of thread are higher, some of them are lower. But again, it's not going to affect the functionality, just the overall aesthetic. So if you don't care, well, just keep going and sew away. But I care, so I'm going to carefully pull this through. And then when you're pulling this tight, you can see the little loop of thread there. You want to get that so it's going to close up nicely. And so I can do that by twisting this, and you can just get it so it's going to be a little loop there. And so when you pull it closed, it's not twisted on itself, which would mess up how it looks, right? And then I pull this one out from behind my finger and just give that a little tug too. So that's your first stitch, right? And that's always the hardest one to get. As you go along, it's going to hold itself together, and it'll become easier. So now I'm just going to repeat that. So again, start with the front, go through the next adjacent hole. It should be easy. Comes right out the back, right there. Pull that through, twist it so it's facing the right orientation on that loop, and then pull down and hold it under your index finger again. And then starting from the back, you're going to go over that thread again, come back to the front, pull, twist that loop so it's in the right orientation, and there you go. And that's two threads. And you can see how they're both facing the same orientation. They're looking nice and neat. I'm trying to keep this top edge all aligned so it looks tidy, and then we can just keep on going. And I'm going to stop talking and start sewing, and you can see how I do this, the different methods that I use to do it nice and quickly. So hold that down. Get the loop aligned. And then one final tug on this, and that gets it out of the way of your index finger, so the next one you can hold underneath your index finger. All right. Loop, pull down, take it back, through, tighten, tighten, make sure this is still aligned. Notice how my fingers are staying on the wall to keep it nice and straight the whole time. The more you can do that, the better your tension is going to go into keeping the wallet straight and even, and it'll also keep the whole thing just more snug and looking better in general. That's one of the things that I've figured out. These are all little tips and tricks that I figured out because I've sewn a lot of these wallets right now, way more than I ever thought I would have. But that's a good thing. Thank you for all of your support. to get that loop straight, so when I pull it tight, it's good, good. And this is the last normal stitch that I'm going to do. This is the third hole from the end, so I'm going to do it as normal, pull down, go through. Okay, so now you can see what's happened. We've got this whole line of stitches along here. They're all going at this slight angle this way, right? And that's why they look so even on both sides. And then in these last two holes, we're going to do something called a back stitch. And I'm using a double back stitch in here. I've actually been using a single back stitch in the wallets that I've been sewing for myself, and none of them have come apart, but the double back stitch is just a little more secure. So we're going to do that for you. So you're going to do a similar thing. We're going to put the needle through, but instead of you pulling down for this stitch, on the other side, we're going to pull up. You're going to pull up, and then on the other side, you're going to go underneath that thread. Right, so you're changing the orientation of the threads relative to each other. And the reason for that is we want to have this stitch up at the top of the hole on one side. So over here, it's up a little higher, and it's parallel to the edge instead of at a slight angle. Right, it's parallel to the edge. And on the bottom, it's a little bit lower, and it's also parallel to the edge. And that's because when we do one of the back stitches, the other piece of thread is going to lay down next to it to create that double piece of thread. And you don't want them crossing each other because they'll make a lump. If they lie parallel, they'll look nice and neat. And so the second one, you want to get it to be on the opposite sides. This means doing the same stitches you were the whole time, where you're going to go through from the front to the back, and you're going to pull down. The reason you're pulling down is you want this one to be opposite. So the first part of the back stitch is on the top, the second part is on the bottom. Right? So let's just take a look at this. Now we're all the way along the one row. Right here, you can just barely see that this thread is a little more towards this side than the thread just before it, right here. That's a little more towards that side. And they're both parallel, which is in contrast to all the threads along here, which are at a slight angle. Okay, so we're going to give that a little tug, make sure that's tight. See how I kept the edge nice and straight, and it's nice and flush. That's going to make it look really good. So now we want to start our back stitch. So I'm going to start from the front again, and I'm going to come in and try to stay. So this is you're going to want to lay this stitch on the front down on top of the one above it. So you can see how it's at this edge on top. So that means you want to go through the top of this hole. So this is the only part where you want to be very careful, because the better this goes, the better the wallet will look, and the better it'll stay together. It really should stay together anyway, but just be careful and you'll have a nice looking wallet at the end. And that's going to come out at the top over here. So you can see it's at the top part of this hole, right? And it's going through the top part of this hole. And so when I pull this through, first of all, don't pull this through all the way. You want to leave the thread, a little loop of thread here that you can tug on to snug up that last stitch going this direction before you start on the back stitch. But I just go through to leave that little thread there. Now you're going to come from the back side, and here you're going to want to lie this on the bottom half, right? So this is down here like that, so it's going to be lying parallel on the bottom. So you're going to want to go through the bottom part of this hole. So try to get it below those other threads and carefully work it through and try to get it to come out on the other side at the bottom. And it's going to look something like that. So you can see how it's at the bottom here, right? And that's because you want this thread to lie on the opposite side of the other one. So let's pull that through and leave those little butterfly wings, right? And the reason for that is you got those little wings now. You can tug on the ones that are closest to the edge, and that's going to snug up this last stitch in there. See these ones closest to the edge. And now you pull on the threads that are here, and that's going to tighten up that first back stitch, right? And now you can see the two stitches are parallel to each other on both sides. And is this focusing? I hope it's focusing. And it looks nice and neat, and that's going to hold together. I would have done that single one for myself, but for you, I recommend doing the double back stitch because it'll be even more secure. Alright, so this one is now going to lie on the bottom along that other piece of thread. So they start on the front again, as we do every single time. And now you're going to take this needle and try to go through the bottom half. But I go through the bottom half here, and then I try to end up in the middle on the other side, so above that thread on the back side. So see how that needle ended up right there above the thread on the back. It's going in at the bottom on the front, right? But it's coming out the top on the back. And so let's just take this through, and I'll show you why that happens after I got this through. It'll be easier when I have the next set thing. So I'm leaving that loop again, and I'm gonna see how I'm twisting it to make sure it's nice and straight, so when I pull it tight it's good. Now on the back side, you're going to want to start above this first thread, right? So pull this one down a little bit to get it out of the way, and you're going to come in with your needle, and you're going to go in at an angle from the top to the middle again, and the objective is to come out in between these threads over here on this side. So this loop's going to be down, right, because you want this to be on the bottom, and the needle is going to come between the two, and so your thread, this is the last thread that's going to come through the leather, is going to be right between these two other pieces of thread, and that'll make it look nice and neat. So once again, let's get these things so that the loops, nice little butterfly wings that are ready to snug, just leave a little bit left there, and then one more time, we're going to take the part that's closest to the end, the part that's connected to the back stitch that's already done, and we're going to give that a little tug to keep it snug, make sure it's snug before you finalize this, and then we're going to pull these little loops in, and that's going to complete the one end of the leather. And it's a little wrinkled, but you know, as you can straighten it out, and the thread can move around, and you can get this very nice edge like that, and these two nice back stitches on either side, and that's what's going to hold it closed. And now you're going to need a pair of nail clippers. That's what I've been using for this. So I've got these nail clippers that are nice and sharp, and you're going to hold the nail clippers. I do it with my right hand. If you're lefty, you just reverse this. But I hold it so that it's coming from the outside, right? And the reason for this is if you have it parallel to the thread, it might cut one of the other threads. You don't want to do that. If you have it perpendicular, it can't really cut the other thread. So coming from the outside like this, it's hanging off. You also could accidentally nip the leather if you weren't careful. So just, you know, this is the last step. You did all this work to get here, so let's just finish it off right. So I hold this fairly taut. You don't need to be yanking on it, but pretty taut. And I get my nail clipper right up against the leather, and I just snip off that piece of thread, right? And so now you have this finished edge. And there's a little piece of thread in there. I'll take some pictures so you can see this in higher resolution. But the little piece of thread there is just stuck in that tiny little hole with all those other pieces of thread going through it, and that's what holds this whole thing together. So this is lightly waxed linen thread, and the wax makes it stick to itself, and that's what holds it all together. Okay, so now just do it on the back side. Hold this up again, and we will snip it off. And there you go. And so I kind of push the threads together just to keep everything nice and aligned for aesthetic reasons. But you can look at that. That is what the final stitching is going to look like if you get it right. If you don't get it right, well, it might not look exactly like that, but as long as you're careful with your back stitch and everything's snug down, it'll be perfectly reliable. So now I'm going to do the other side. So you would repeat this on this end. I do it so this is the side that's facing me now, the outside's facing me. So I just rotate it from here to here and do the exact same procedure in through here and then back through there, all the way along until you get to the end. because that'll behave just like this side, only you're just looking at a different portion of it. So I want to get started on the ID window, so let's do that, and again we'll work from the inside of the wallet out. So now you're looking at the wallet upside down. This is your ID window. I'm going to do this with the ID window on the outside because, well, I like that. Actually, no, I'll do it with the ID window on the inside, because I know some of you wanted that, and I already have my wallet finished with the ID window on the outside, so I don't need another one of those. So I'll do it with on the inside, so you know what's going on. So first we need to thread these needles again. So take a second piece of thread, and when you're handling this, the more careful you are, the better you'll keep that nice sharp end to make threading easier. And let's just thread it. This is clearly the most fun part of sewing a wallet. Alright, come on. Oh, alright, so if you mess up the threading, I just take my nail clippers and I'll trim off that little end. That's why I give you a little extra on the thread, so you can try it on that way. And if you completely screw up an entire layer, you can always just cut it out with a razor blade, and that's why I give you the extra pieces of thread. Okay, come on. And some of these threads get a little bigger than others, and a little harder to thread. You can grab it. Yeah, you grab it with the nail clippers, and there you go. Alright. So we got one end threaded. Now let's go to the other side. Yeah, that was easier. Okay. And again, I pull it at an angle to keep that thread from moving around, because you definitely don't want to thread these a second time if you can help it. Pull at an angle. Okay, now to start this, you need to notice that there's one more hole on this part of the leather than there is on this part. And the reason for that is you want to hold down these little tabs of leather right here that would otherwise be hanging out, and so the leather actually, this thread actually comes off of there, off of the 3 layers of leather and down through the 1, and that's what holds those little tabs down. So let's do that for you here. So first, you don't even need this, just put that over here. Go through that first hole on the first piece of leather, come through, and this is where you're going to do that lining up your needles to make sure you got the same amount of thread on both sides. Alright, now you want to take whichever side you want to be on the inside, that's where we're starting from, so we want the ID pocket on the inside for this one. And I'm going to line it up just adjacent to that hole, and then I'm going to take this top needle and go through like that. So that's through the other side, and then put it through maybe halfway, and then take this piece and wrap it around and just put that needle through this first hole on that piece, right? Just like that. And then try to line this up just like you were doing on the other end. So line the 3 pieces up, and then you can just pull that needle through, and then get these little loops all aligned. So this is what happens if you don't do that. It can get a little messed up. So just twist the needle until the loop is nice and flat, and then pull it through. Alright, don't pull that too tight because the other end's still loose. So I'm actually going to hold this down like before. Okay. So hold both ends so it doesn't move, hold that down, and then pinch it like that. And then you're going to take this back end and you're going to go just like before over top of this piece of thread. And go through just like that. So now we're through the other side, through all 3 pieces of leather. And then you can pull that through and then get that little loop and pull it so it's like it's snug but it's not tight. And then you're going to want to align these 3 pieces of leather with that top edge aligned. And this is when you can do that, final kind of snug on one side, snug on the other side. But don't pull too hard, those will snug down as you stitch up the second stitch. So now we're starting from the inside just like before. Take the needle, go through that adjacent hole, make sure it's coming at the adjacent hole on the other side, like that, right? And when it's in there, that needle is going to align the pieces of leather really well, so just give it a little bit of room to wiggle, and then hold your fingers back down on it again when everything's aligned, and that'll make sure this is starting off on the right foot. Alright, so I got that edge aligned, this needle's in there, it's straight through, it's not twisted or anything, so you know the leather's aligned. So just hold that with your thumb and index finger on your other hand, and then pull this through. And just like before, make sure that loop's flat, pull it tight, and hold it under that index finger. And hold it down. Okay, now come from the back, put this through over there, come through to the front, get that loop flat, pull it through. Alright, so now we're on our way. So we're just going to do what we were doing before, front to back, hold down, back to front, snug. So front to back, hold down, back to front, and then snug front, snug the back, and then do it again. And just keep going until you get to that 3 holes from the end, just like the other side. Alright, so this is that third hole from the end, so this is my last normal stitch. We're going into the back stitch. So now the difference is that instead of holding it down, I'm just going to pull through and hold up, and I sort of just hold it up with my finger like this, and then I just work this needle through underneath it, because it's a little different. You're only doing like one of these, so it's not a big deal to get it like a really efficient process. Well, one of these on each of the 4 layers. You just got to make sure you get it in the right orientation to help it look good aesthetically. And then this last one is the same thing as normal. It's coming through, pulling down, and this one comes through. Now, after this, we're ready for the 2 back stitches. Alright, so give it one final little pull. Make sure everything looks aligned. You can see we're all the way along. We got everything going down at that you know, at that angle like this, except for the very last two, which one's at the top and one's at the bottom. So we're ready to do our back stitch. So let's start on this inside again, and we're going to once again go towards the top of this stitch, trying to come out of the top of the other hole, like that. So we're out at the top of the other hole, and we're going to pull this through, leaving a little loop of thread that we can snug down later. And you can see because this thread over here, this last stitch before the back stitch, has now gotten a little loose, and you don't want that to be loose before you do the back stitch, because once you tighten up the back stitch, you won't be able to tighten up this other one, and it might not look perfect to you. Or it might look perfect, you might have no idea. But anyway, this is the best way to do it. So now we're going to take this one on the back side, and we're going to go down to the bottom of the hole. And sometimes it pops up too high, and you can just retract and then try to get it underneath, try to get it lower. So mine popped up too high a few times, but now I just tried it a few times, and it's at the bottom, right? And so we're going to pull that through and leave those two little loops of thread. And once again, we're leaving those loops of thread so that we can tighten up. See how loose this stitch got on the end there, right here? It's like a big loop. That would just be stuck there if you tighten it up before, you know, snugging this back down. But because we have these two little loops, we can just pull the end closer to the edge, tighten that right back down, right? And then immediately afterwards, before moving anything, tighten this first back stitch down. And that's going to secure all the forward stitches and prepare you so you got a nice first back stitch to finish your wallet. I pull the thread a little bit this way, and that kind of helps separate the back stitches more, so they're more individual back stitches, which looks a little better aesthetically. And also it helps me make sure that my thread is going to be lined up right next to the other thread like I want it to be. See? Okay, from the inside one more time. This time we're going to take this guy. You can already see he's on the bottom there. And so we're going to go from the bottom through to the middle. Right? We're going to try to come out just above that thread on the back, and we're going to pull through. Alright, and leave that little loop there, ready to snug down. And then on the back again, so just get this other thread out of the way, and we're going to come from the top, and we're going to try to go down in the middle. It's top, like on this side of that thread, right? So it's going to sort of surround the thread like this. We're going to come in from over here, and we're going to go through and try to come out the middle in between these other two threads. So this one, again, it popped out at the top, if you can see that. So I just want to retract that and maybe nudge this thread over a little bit so I can come up on the other side of it, just like that. So now we're on the other side of it. Making it a little longer so you can see it. So right there, between those two pieces of thread, we're going to pull this out and leave that little loop again. Alright, so now we got those two loops, and so this is the final one for this side, and you're going to pull on that one end of the loop to tighten up that first back stitch, make sure it's snug, and then just pull on the other free end of the thread, and that'll create that second back stitch. And then you can kind of wiggle it, flatten it out, make sure everything looks good. And look at that, now we got those two back stitches over here, we got these two back stitches over here, we're ready to trim it off. So hold it like you did before, keep that nail clipper hanging off the edge so that you don't trim anything else that you don't mean to, and simply pull that off, right? And now pull this off the same way, and then I get my fingernails in there and I kind of snug up these back stitches to make everything nice and parallel and nice and even. And that's it. So now we have that done. So you have your ID on the inside, and when you fold this up, it's going to fold up like that, and your ID's going to be on the inside, you've got your little pocket on the outside, and now, I'll have to finish up these other ones.